Okay guys, today we are going to talk about how we write a sine or cosine function when we're given the amplitude, the period, the phase shift, and the vertical shift. So it's kind of opposite of what we've been doing. Instead of graphing, you're going to know all this stuff, or you're going to look at a graph and find this stuff, and you have to come up with the equation. And just so you know, sometimes in real life problems they'll call these sinusoidal problems, and that just means if you see something where it says find the sinusoidal function, that is talking about a sine or cosine function. And you can write it as a sine or a cosine. It just depends on what your phase shift is. The ones that we're going to do today, I will tell you which one I want. So we're going to start with a cosine function. So we want to write a cosine function. And you know, we're not even going to look at the graph yet. You know that the amplitude is, let's say 4. The period is pi. The phase shift is pi over 4 to the right. And the vertical shift is down 2, or negative 2, however you want to write that. So what your job is you're going to say, well, y equals, you have something, you know it's a cosine, parenthesis, something, theta, plus or minus something. We'll have to figure out what that is there in a minute. And then plus or minus this vertical shift. So basically you have 4 things that you need to put in there. The easiest one to do, the first easiest one, is the amplitude. The amplitude is 4. So I know this is 4. The problem is, remember how we talked that we're not sure, does it go up first or does it start down first? So a lot of times you'll see your answer should have a plus or minus here, because that will take care of both ways, whether it starts up or whether it starts down. Now, the next easiest one to do would be the vertical shift. The vertical shift is down 2. So now we know that this is 2 and it's down, so this has to be a minus. So those are the 2 easy ones to put in your function. Y equals plus or minus 4 cosine of something theta plus or minus something minus 2. Now, we've worked a lot with period and phase shift. To get the period, we took 2 pi over this number. To get what this number is, and your book calls it a letter, I think they call it B, but to get whatever this number is that's going to go here, we do the same thing. We take 2 pi over pi. Because the normal period is 2 pi, your period is pi, those cancel, so this number is 2. It's kind of the shortcut way. If you're still confused on that, ask me in class and I can show you why you can just divide like that. Now, the phase shift is a little bit different. To get the phase shift, what you've done the last couple days in class is you took this number divided by this number. On the phase shift, you have to do the opposite. So instead of dividing, because you don't know this number, you have to work backwards. You're going to take this number, 2, times your phase shift, so pi over 4. And when you simplify that, that gives you pi over 2. So you're going to have pi over 2 here. And now you need to decide whether it's plus or minus. Well, I'm going to the right. It tells me I'm going to the right. And we've talked about this with horizontal transformations. If it's going to the right, inside the parentheses, it should be a minus. So my answer, without all the scribbles, would be y equals plus or minus 4 cosine of 2 theta minus pi over 2 minus 2. That is your answer. That's your equation. Now, if I asked you for a sine function and I just gave you this stuff, it would be the same thing, but you would just have a sine in here. So this really doesn't matter unless you're looking at a graph. When you're looking at a graph, it's a little bit easier to choose, but for the most part, if you're not looking at a graph, we will just tell you whether we want a sine or a cosine. And everything goes the same, except for saying cosine, you're going to have sine there. Let's try another one. I'm going to get one with kind of a weird period to see if we can work on fractions a little bit. So let's make a sine function. Let's say the amplitude is 4.2. The period is Let's do 2 pi over 3. That one comes up a lot. The phase shift, we're going to say is pi over 6 to the left, or negative pi over 6. And the vertical shift we'll say is 17. Really the amplitude and vertical shift can be anything because we don't have to do a lot of math with them. So how I start these is I write y equals, I know I have a blank, sine of something, theta or x. Remember theta and x are the same thing. You can put either x or theta. And then I'm going to leave it so I can go back. It either has to be a plus or minus blank. That's part of my phase shift. And then plus or minus something for my vertical shift. So amplitude, this number here describes the period. This number here describes the phase shift. And this number here is your vertical shift. I didn't want that color. Let's do this one. I'm going to start by rewriting this. Y equals. What number is going to go here for the amplitude? 4.2. And remember from the last example, we said plus or minus because we don't know if it goes up first or down first from the information that I gave you. Sine, I'm going to leave this whole parenthesis blank. And my vertical shift is 17. So plus 17. I guess I could put theta in here. So the first thing I need to do is to find the coefficient of theta, the number that goes right here, or that's going to go right here. And I use my period. I'm going to have my normal period, 2 pi, divided by 2 pi over 3. And when you're working with fractions, that's 2 pi times 3 over 2 pi. That's the reciprocal. So that answer is 3 theta. The value of the coefficient in front of theta is 3. Now my phase shift. Right away, it's going to the left. And so most of you will recognize that right away. If it's going to the left, that means it's going to be a plus here, because it's negative. And it's going to the left pi over 6. And remember from the last example, I said that normally we took this number divided by 3. Well, we're going to do the opposite. The opposite of dividing is multiplying. So in order to get my phase shift, I'm going to take pi over 6 times 3, and that gives me pi over 2. They're not always pi over 2. That was just my 2 examples that happened on. And that's how you write a function when you're just given the 4 parts. So in class tomorrow, your job will be to be able to write a function when you're given the 4 parts, and we will also try some when you're looking at the graph of a function, which is very, very, very similar. See you tomorrow.